Welcome, history buffs and medieval enthusiasts, to a journey back in time. We're diving into an era where justice was, shall we say, a little different. Forget everything you thought you knew about courtrooms and legal proceedings. The Dark Ages weren't just dark in terms of lighting, their legal system had some truly peculiar quirks. It was a time when the scales of justice often tipped in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes the culprits weren't your usual human suspects. Oh no, they were often furry, feathered, or, most surprisingly, oinky. Yes, we're talking about animal defendants. Today, we're exploring the fascinating and frankly hilarious world of beastly justice. This was a time when animals found themselves in the dock, facing very human charges. The medieval courtroom could sometimes resemble a zoo, albeit a very serious one. Imagine a judge, a jury, and a defendant who might just try to eat the evidence. The concept of fairness was certainly applied broadly, but when it came to animals, the scales of justice were decidedly unbalanced, often leaning heavily towards conviction. It's a testament to the unique mindset of the medieval period. They saw the world through a lens of superstition, fear, and a surprising amount of literal interpretation. So, prepare yourselves for tales of legal absurdity. We'll uncover why some animals became public enemies and how they faced the full wrath of the law. In the grand scheme of medieval animal crime, two species stood out. They were consistently at the top of the most wanted list. These creatures weren't just nuisances, they were considered public enemy number one. They faced trials, convictions, and often the ultimate penalty. Our primary targets for today's legal deep dive are the humble pig and the majestic, yet feared, wolf. Their stories are truly wild. Let's start with the pig, an animal we usually associate with bacon and mud. In medieval times, however, pigs had a far more sinister reputation. They were known for their insatiable appetites. A pig on the loose was a force of nature, capable of consuming anything in its path. This often meant a tendency to sample local produce. Farmers would wake to find their carefully cultivated crops utterly decimated. Accusations of crop destruction were common. A pig's rooting habits could ruin a season's harvest, leading to genuine economic hardship. But here's where it gets truly bizarre. Pigs were also surprisingly and disturbingly accused of murder. Yes, you heard that right. These weren't just minor scuffles. We're talking about capital offenses, often involving infants or small children left unattended. Pigs were often allowed to roam freely, even within villages. This proximity to humans, combined with their opportunistic nature, led to tragic incidents. A pig's powerful jaws and tusks, if present, could inflict serious harm. These were not cuddly farm animals in every instance. So, while crop damage was a nuisance, human fatalities elevated the pig to a truly feared and legally accountable creature. When a pig committed a perceived crime, the legal wheels began to turn. It wasn't just a farmer's complaint, it was a formal accusation. A distraught farmer would accuse a bewildered pig. The poor animal would then be rounded up and brought before the court. Imagine the scene: a judge, a jury, and a grunting defendant. The pig's inability to defend itself was, predictably, a major hurdle. It couldn't offer an alibi, nor could it cross-examine witnesses. Its only contribution was usually a confused oink or a snort. Despite this obvious communication barrier, the legal system pressed on. They even appointed a lawyer specifically for the pig. This wasn't out of kindness, but rather a belief in due process, even for animals. The pig needed a fair, if utterly pointless, defense. The trial included witnesses, often the victims or their families. They would recount the pig's alleged misdeeds in vivid detail. Circumstantial evidence was key. Muddy hoofprints, half-eaten crops, or tragically, the scene of a fatal attack all served as proof. Sometimes the pig's owner would also be implicated. They might face charges for negligence, especially if the pig was a repeat offender. The court would deliberate, often with great solemnity. The verdict was frequently guilty, leading to the pig's execution. This wasn't a quiet affair. The execution was often public, serving as a deterrent to other potentially criminal livestock. The method of execution usually involved a butcher. After all, who better to handle a pig than someone accustomed to the task? Sometimes the pig would even be dressed in human clothes for the execution. This added a macabre theatrical element to the proceedings. It underscored the idea that the pig was being punished as if it were a human criminal. The symbolism was not lost on the onlookers. These trials weren't isolated incidents. Records show dozens of pig trials across medieval Europe, from France to Switzerland. Each case highlights the peculiar blend of legal formality and superstitious belief that defined the era. The pig, once a source of sustenance, became a symbol of chaos and a target for the full force of medieval law. Now, let's turn our attention to the wolf. This creature was, and still is, majestic, yet in medieval times it was profoundly misunderstood. Wolves were the boogeymen of the medieval world. They lurked in the forests, a constant, terrifying presence on the fringes of civilization. Their howls echoed through the night, striking fear into the hearts of villagers. They represented the wild, untamed forces of nature. Accusations against wolves were rampant. They were primarily blamed for livestock attacks, a devastating blow to any farming community. A single wolf pack could decimate a flock of sheep or a herd of cattle. This meant financial ruin and potential starvation for families. But the accusations didn't stop at livestock. Wolves were also blamed for the disappearance of children. These were often tragic incidents of children wandering too far from home. The wolf became the convenient, terrifying explanation. They were generally blamed for being, well, wolves. Their very nature, their predatory instincts, were seen as inherently evil. Folklore and superstition painted them as agents of the devil. They were not just animals. They were instruments of malevolent forces. The fear was palpable and widespread. Wolves were not just a threat to property, they were a threat to life itself. This deep-seated fear fueled the desire for justice, even if that justice was directed at a wild animal. Wolf trials were even more theatrical than those involving pigs. They often involved grand pronouncements and elaborate rituals. The most striking aspect was that wolves were often tried in absentia. The defendant was rarely, if ever, present in the courtroom. Imagine a trial where the accused is a phantom, a shadow in the forest. Yet, the legal proceedings continued with full gravity. Warrants were issued for their arrest. These were formal documents commanding the capture of the named wolf or wolf pack. Bounties were often placed on their heads. The legal system incentivized their capture, turning hunters into de facto law enforcement. If caught, the wolf faced the ultimate penalty. There was little mercy shown to a creature so reviled and feared. Their execution was often public and brutal, a symbolic victory over the forces of the wild. It was a display of human dominance. But the legal consequences for wolves went even further. Sometimes wolves were even excommunicated from the church. This was a truly extraordinary measure. Excommunication was reserved for the most heinous human sins, cutting one off from divine grace. To excommunicate a wolf meant seeing it as a sentient being, capable of sin and in league with demonic powers. The church would issue formal anathemas, condemning the wolves to hell. This was a spiritual battle as much as a legal one. These trials and excommunications highlight the medieval worldview. They blurred the lines between the natural and the supernatural. They believed that divine intervention could be sought to protect against these animal threats. Prayer and legal action went hand in hand. The wolf, a creature of instinct, was elevated to the status of a moral agent capable of evil and deserving of spiritual damnation. It was a desperate attempt to control the uncontrollable, to bring order to a world that felt constantly threatened by the wild. So, why did medieval people put animals on trial? It wasn't just a quirky pastime, there were deeper, more complex reasons at play. A major driver was fear and superstition. The medieval world was a place of constant uncertainty, where natural disasters and disease were common. There was a significant lack of scientific understanding. People didn't grasp animal behavior in the way we do today. Instead, they attributed human motivations and even supernatural influences to animal actions. A pig wasn't just hungry, it was malicious. Animals were often seen as agents of the devil. This belief was deeply ingrained in the religious worldview of the time. A destructive animal could be interpreted as a demonic manifestation, a test of faith, or a punishment from God. This made them convenient scapegoats for societal problems. When crops failed or children disappeared, blame needed to be assigned. It was easier to blame a malevolent animal than to confront the harsh realities of famine, disease, or inadequate childcare. These trials also served a psychological purpose. They provided a sense of control in a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable. By formally prosecuting an animal, people felt they were actively fighting against the forces of evil and disorder. It was a way to assert human dominance over the natural world, even if that assertion was based on flawed logic. The trials reinforced community values and moral codes. They were public spectacles that reminded everyone of right and wrong, even for animals. They also provided a legal outlet for grief and anger. When a child was killed by a pig, the trial offered a form of retribution. Ultimately, these animal trials were a reflection of the medieval mind. They show a society grappling with its environment, its beliefs, and its fears. The peculiar nature of medieval justice truly stands out in history. It's a fascinating glimpse into a world so different from our own. These animal trials remind us that the concept of justice can sometimes be overcooked or perhaps just a little underthought. It's a testament to how societies interpret their world, their fears, and their understanding of morality. While we might chuckle at the idea of a pig in the dock, these stories offer valuable insights into the human condition. They show our enduring need for order, for explanation, and for a sense of control over the unpredictable. So the next time you see a pig, remember its storied past in the courtroom, and perhaps give a little nod to the wolves who faced excommunication. It's a wild world out there, and it seems it always has been. Thank you for joining us on this peculiar journey through medieval law.